Matthew Lloyd says, some have called Scalia's death suspicious, accepting that there was no foul play as assassination and the like beyond the current administration. Or do you think that more people have become conspiracy theorists because it seems less and less crazy to think our government might actually do some of these things? It's neither. And both of them, one of them is a result of the pop culture. Scalia was a man in his 70s who was very obese, had a serious heart condition, died in his sleep. There's nothing suspicious about this whatsoever. Heard all of this with Andrew Breitbart, who was considerably younger. And as I've said many times before, I'm not going to get into this again. A year before he died, we knew he was in big trouble. We tried to save him. And when I found out that morning, which is almost exactly 4 years ago, it'll be 4 years ago within 3 days or so, when I found out Andrew Breitbart had died of a heart attack the night before, I was surprised at how unsurprised I was. So let's get to the meat of the question. Is it beyond the current administration? It is. And the reason that people assume that the government will do things like assassinate people who are a threat, or bring down the towers, or fake the moon landing, is really because of Hollywood. Because we've seen it so many times that we believe it to be true. We've seen so many times where either businesses or governments just have people killed, and it makes great drama. And we've seen it literally hundreds, if not thousands, of times. I don't know, the guy's a whistleblower. What happened? He found dead in an alley. But you know the story. You've seen the backstory. You know the big reveal at the end. Of course they had him killed. Of course the government had him killed. Of course the CIA had him killed. Of course the big corporations had him killed. And it's drama and it's storytelling. It just doesn't happen, ever. I mean, think about some of these leaks. I mean, just think about some of these stories, some of these leaks. Nixon's presidency was on the line. Nixon didn't have anybody killed. All of these things just simply don't. They just don't happen. They just don't. The only exception, and I don't know much about it, was I think the Vince Foster thing is a little convenient. But even then, it just doesn't happen that way. If it did, I don't think there'd be a Rush Limbaugh around, or a Glenn Beck, or for that matter, a Michael Moore. There's a pretty compelling case to say that Michael Moore nearly switched that 2004 election. I mean, he was really getting a lot of traction. And evil George Bush and evil Dick Cheney didn't, they didn't have him bumped off. Nobody gets bumped off. You get bumped off in Russia, but you really have to push your luck. But when you get into socialist countries, when socialism reaches its full flower of, the workers' paradise, then you simply disappear if you dare to criticize the government. So to answer the first part of the question, is it beyond the current administration? It is, and it's beyond the last administration. It's beyond the next administration. People just don't have people killed. It just doesn't happen. And it seems odd to say it, doesn't it? Because you're so sure that they do, but you've seen it in movies, and those are movies. You can't see ray guns in space either. How many times have you thought if you go into space and fire a laser beam at something, you'd see this big red or green bolt? It's absolutely invisible. There's no way you could see it in space. Physically impossible. So there's a lot of things that we see and expect and believe, but just aren't true because of the movies. So that part of the question is, I don't think it's behind it. But what I think is another interesting part of the question is this business about more people becoming conspiracy theorists. And I think there's an interesting reason for that, too. I think it's got to do with YouTube, with the Internet, but specifically with YouTube. Because prior to YouTube, where would you see these crackpot theories? There's not a network in the world that would have aired Loose Change. I mean, I could go through Loose Change on a literally frame-by-frame basis and just completely dismantle the whole thing. And there's no way a network would run something like that. There's no way a network would run all of these weird, bizarre conspiracy theories. There's no way that a network would run the moon landing as a conspiracy theory. At least not until very recently. I suppose now it's got enough momentum that you could ask questions. They did run a great Mythbusters that made the case as well as I've ever heard it put. But this is the point I'm leading to. YouTube, it's a wonder. I mean, look, we wouldn't be having this conversation if it weren't for the internet and YouTube and the ability for just regular people to just get out there with a camera and talk to everybody in the world. So I am, I'm not criticizing this, but one of the detrimental and darker aspects out it is that you can put together a documentary like Loose Change on 9/11 or the Moon Landing Conspiracy or whatever, and using skillful rhetoric and taking extremely small examples and literally, freeze framing things that are obvious when you run them in real time, you can, without any rebuttal, make a case that if you don't know anything about it, sounds very compelling. And I'm not immune to that. I read a book called Best Evidence back when I was a limo driver. It must have been '88. It was about the Kennedy assassination and the belief that Kennedy was actually shot from behind, but while he was on Air Force One, they made entrance wounds and covered up the exit wounds, and it was like 500 pages, 3 pages dedicated to Levi Harvey Oswald. I read this in the middle of the night and thought, my God, they're going to come and kill me. I have the secret now. I should check out the door. I locked the door. I was really worried. So, when you read something like that, they're trying to sell a book. They're just trying to sell a book. Ancient Astronauts, classic example. On the plains of Nazca, Peru, are strange shapes designed for the sky gods. Look at this picture of this hummingbird. Notice how the wings of the hummingbird are exactly like the parking stations of these jet fighters at an Air Force base. Was this a naval base or Air Force base for alien flying saucers? Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Well, it turns out the hummingbird is 17 feet across, something like that. The Bermuda Triangle, the Marine Sulphur Queen disappears in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle. Flight 19 disappears without a trace. Okay, well, it turns out we actually found Flight 19, but even before we found it, we knew that the likely event was that these guys got lost and had to ditch in the ocean. And the killer app as far as the Bermuda Triangle is, if you take an area the size of the Bermuda Triangle, place it anywhere over major trade routes in the world, you have an equal or greater number of disappearances. So once I heard that, I said, well, so much for that. And Loch Ness and all the rest. But because of YouTube, you can get somebody put together a case on anything. I can put together a case on anything. And as long as I just show what I want to show, people who don't know anything about it could do it. I could convince you that George Bush was a reptile, or that George Bush had been replaced by another guy who looks like him. And I could show you pictures of him with the lighting different, and I could point little arrows, and I can do whatever I want to. So I think the reason more and more people are becoming conspiracy theorists is because they have access to nutcase theories that they didn't have before. Now, the good news is, it's kind of a nice segue to the last question, which is the one I wanted to spend so much time on. The good news is that while there's plenty of nuts out there and no filter on them, and I don't want to filter on them, there are, in fact, people out there who are doing remarkable work, and that leads me to the last question that I've saved 20 minutes for. If you want to leave now, you can go ahead.